Hi, it's Matt Forrest Essenwine once again with another edition of Wit and Wordplay. This is a series of videos that I'm trying to keep fairly short, just to help you as parent, teacher, educator, even kids, to learn how to read and write and appreciate poetry. And as someone who writes a lot of children's poetry, each of these videos I focus on one of my poems, and I sort of I don't take it apart, but I kind of give you a little background as to how it came about and how you can use maybe a particular poetic device or something about the poem that can help strengthen not only poetry writing but appreciation for any kind of writing, and it strengthens any kind of writing when you understand poetry, because poetry, there's a lot crammed into a tiny little space when it comes to poetry. There's you can simile and metaphor and internal rhyme and perspective and all these kinds of things that go into a poem. And today I wanted to focus on the fallacy that poetry has to rhyme, because that's what, when kids think of poetry, they think, it has to rhyme. But that's not always the case. And when you're learning how to write poetry, I always try to express to kids that I'm not worried about rhyme, I'm not worried about rhythm or meter or anything like that. When you're first starting out writing poetry, the one thing I want kids to do is to be able to just understand what it is you're writing about. Get an appreciation for what that subject is. And so I wanted to share with you today a poem that I had written for the National Geographic Book of Nature Poetry. The poet J. Patrick Lewis, a former U.S. Children's Poet Laureate, had asked me to write a poem about rainbow eucalyptus trees. And if you take a look at this slide, this is the bark of the rainbow eucalyptus tree. And if you can imagine how big these trees are in these groves of huge trees, they're a member of the rubber tree family. And the bark, as it ages, it peels off and it reveals that yellow pith underneath. And as it ages, it turns all these different colors until it gets back to brown. But these trees, the whole tree looks like what you see here. And so I was thinking, wow, it looks like paint splattered. And so I thought, well, let's go with that. So here is a free verse poem, and again, this is in the National Geographic Book of Nature Poetry. Rainbow eucalyptus, colors borrowed from God's own palette. Celestial greens, reds, ocean blues streak across canvas bark like mischievous brushstrokes of an artful nymph. And yes, mischievous brushstrokes is even difficult for me to say sometimes. Even the book came out in 2015, and it's still sometimes difficult for me to say. But I deliberately used that word, an artful nymph, as well. These were specifically chosen because of the sound that they make. So when you're writing poetry, especially free verse poetry, you really want to pay attention to the words that you use, the images that you use, and how you break up your lines. There's all kinds of things you can do with free verse poetry that you can't do with rhyming metered verse, like breaking up certain lines and kind of connecting sentences and things like that. Canvas bark, as I mentioned in another video, if you don't have the right word for a poem, you make your own word up. So I could have said canvas because it feels like these look like they're just splattered with paint. So, canvas would have been a perfectly fine word to use, but I wanted something a little more, it's more a better image than just canvas. And it is certainly bark, but that's kind of boring. But canvas bark, that word, by hyphenating those two, that just makes a whole new image for you. And then, as I was mentioning, mischievous brushstrokes of an artful nymph. The sound of paint being splattered against the canvas, that was kind of what I was going for with those words. I wanted your mouth to be pronouncing the sound that you'd get from the paintbrush. So there you go. Just a couple of little tips on writing free verse poetry. Pay attention to the sound of the words and what you're what you're doing inside You don't have to worry about rhyme, you don't have to worry about rhythm or meter or anything like that. So pay attention to the actual words, the internal organs of the poem. And again, there's plenty of things that you can do with free verse. I've taught free verse poetry, and I could talk hours on free verse poetry, but a short little 5-minute video, and this will suffice. If you like it, please like the post, and feel free to follow me on my blog. You can check me out on the website there, and thank you for watching.